The automotive industry is going through a shift that would have sounded almost impossible just a few years ago. Brands that once built some of the most recognizable vehicles on the road are now fighting to protect their position in an increasingly unforgiving market. Production is being reduced at certain factories, some assembly lines are being shut down altogether, and dealerships that were once packed with buyers are seeing far less traffic. Once you start looking at the financial numbers behind all of this, it becomes clear that these are not isolated warning signs. Here on Auto's Top, we are taking a closer look at 5 automakers whose future could become increasingly uncertain before this decade is over. And this is not a list filled with obscure companies that most drivers have never heard of. Several of the names coming up were once considered major forces in the global auto business, with enormous influence, loyal customers, and reputations that seemed almost impossible to shake. That is exactly what makes this situation so compelling. Slowing demand, questionable business decisions, rising costs, and increasingly aggressive competition are putting pressure on companies that once appeared untouchable. Some of the brands in this video may catch you completely off guard, because their past success makes it difficult to imagine just how much their position has changed. So keep watching, and share this video with someone who follows the car industry closely. These 5 brands are a powerful reminder that status in the automotive world can change much faster than most people expect, even for manufacturers that, not long ago, seemed strong enough to survive almost anything. If you enjoy content about cars, technology, innovation, and smarter choices for buying better, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We are very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every new subscriber helps this project keep growing. Here, you will find videos made to show what is truly worth it in the automotive world, with no fluff, no hidden advertising, and always focused on useful information for anyone who wants to avoid bad buying decisions. So, if this content helped you in any way, subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and follow the next videos. Your subscription may seem simple, but it makes a huge difference for the channel. Thank you for being part of this journey toward 1,000 subscribers. Coming in at number 5 is a name almost nobody would have expected to see on a list like this: Volkswagen. For decades, Europe's largest automaker looked almost untouchable. Its scale, reputation, global reach, and enormous manufacturing network gave the impression that very little could seriously shake the company. But today, Volkswagen is facing one of the most difficult transitions in its modern history, and management has been forced to consider moves that would have sounded unthinkable only a few years ago. For the first time in roughly 87 years of company history, the possibility of closing production sites in Germany has entered serious discussion. That alone tells you how dramatically the situation has changed. But to understand why Volkswagen is under this much pressure, you have to look far beyond Wolfsburg and turn your attention thousands of miles east to a market that became absolutely essential to the company's success: China. For years, China was one of Volkswagen's strongest foundations. German cars enjoyed enormous prestige there, and the company sold huge volumes year after year. But the market Volkswagen once knew has changed at extraordinary speed. Chinese automakers have become far more competitive, with companies such as BYD moving aggressively in electric vehicles, software, technology, and especially pricing. That shift has steadily weakened Volkswagen's position in Asia. For a long time, the company could rely on brand recognition and generations of customer loyalty, but the transition toward electric vehicles happened faster than many established manufacturers expected. And Volkswagen's problems became even more complicated when some of the vehicles designed to lead that transition began experiencing issues of their own. One of the clearest examples is the Volkswagen ID.4. This electric SUV was supposed to become one of the company's major products for the next generation of mobility. Volkswagen needed it to demonstrate that the brand could successfully compete in the electric era. Instead, the ID.4 also became associated with several recall campaigns that placed unwanted attention on one of Volkswagen's most strategically important vehicles. At the beginning of 2026, tens of thousands of vehicles required inspections or corrective action. In some units, concerns involved battery cells where certain internal components may not have been positioned correctly during manufacturing. Another group of vehicles required inspection or updated software designed to improve the system's ability to identify potential battery abnormalities. For some owners, the temporary recommendations were especially inconvenient. They were advised not to charge beyond roughly 80% for a period of time and to avoid certain high-powered fast-charging stations. In a limited number of cases, owners were also advised to park their vehicles outdoors as an additional precaution. Think about how that feels from the buyer's perspective. You spend tens of thousands of dollars on a modern electric SUV because you expect simple, convenient everyday transportation. Then you receive instructions telling you to temporarily limit some of the exact features that helped convince you to buy an electric vehicle in the first place. For Volkswagen, that is an extremely difficult image problem when the vehicle involved is supposed to represent such an important part of the brand's future. Only months later, some owners decided to take the issue into the legal system. Their argument was straightforward: if recommended restrictions prevented them from using the vehicle in the way they believed it was intended to be used, then the ownership experience was no longer matching what they thought they had purchased. At that point, a technical issue began threatening something much harder for any automaker to rebuild once it is damaged: customer confidence, and it would be a mistake to assume Volkswagen's challenges begin and end with the ID. 4. The pressure extends much further across the Volkswagen Group. Audi, Porsche, Seat, and other brands within the organization are also operating in a tougher environment, where competition is becoming more aggressive and profitability is harder to protect. The bigger question is no longer about a single model. It is whether the entire group can adjust quickly enough to an automotive industry that now follows a very different set of rules. That is what makes Volkswagen's situation so symbolic. For generations, the company was one of the strongest global representatives of German manufacturing. Build quality, technical expertise, precision engineering, and the reputation of Made in Germany were deeply connected to Volkswagen's identity. Now the company is reconsidering how much it produces, how much it spends, where it builds vehicles, and even how future models should be developed. The relationship between Volkswagen and its workforce is changing as well. Labor unions have historically held enormous influence within the company, but they are now being pulled into conversations about cost reductions and restructuring plans that would have seemed almost impossible not long ago. Employment numbers show just how significant the transformation could become. Volkswagen has been examining long-term efficiency and restructuring programs that could ultimately affect tens of thousands of positions worldwide. For a company long associated with stable industrial employment, where several generations of the same family have sometimes worked for Volkswagen, this represents a major cultural shift. At the same time, weaker margins, stronger international competition, and rising trade-related costs are making the equation even more difficult. Potential additional tariffs in the United States could place billions of dollars in extra annual costs on the group, adding another layer of pressure at a moment when Volkswagen is already trying to become leaner. And perhaps nothing shows the scale of this reset more clearly than Volkswagen's plans for its manufacturing footprint. The company once had production capacity designed around approximately 12 million vehicles per year. Over time, that capacity could move much closer to around 9 million vehicles. In other words, Volkswagen is no longer focused simply on becoming larger. The priority is shifting toward becoming more efficient, more profitable, and faster at reacting to changes in the market. In an industry evolving at a pace rarely seen before, carrying excess production capacity can quickly become a disadvantage instead of a strength. For Germany, this goes far beyond the future of one automaker. Volkswagen is woven deeply into the country's industrial history. Entire communities depend directly or indirectly on the company, while suppliers, workers, dealerships, and local economies have grown around Volkswagen operations for generations. That is exactly why today's situation would have been so difficult to imagine only a few years ago. Europe's largest automaker is now simultaneously discussing factory capacity, major cost reductions, workforce restructuring, and a substantial reduction in how many vehicles its industrial system is designed to produce. The next few years could therefore define what Volkswagen becomes for an entire generation. And 2027 may prove to be a major test. Either the company accelerates its transformation and regains momentum against a completely reshaped field of competitors, or Volkswagen may have to accept becoming a very different company from the one that dominated the European auto market for decades. At number 4, we have a brand whose identity was once almost impossible to separate from adventure, rugged terrain, and vehicles built to handle conditions that would stop ordinary SUVs in their tracks: Jeep. For generations, few automakers represented off-road capability as strongly as Jeep did. But the picture today looks very different. Over the past several years, part of its customer base has started looking elsewhere, while some dealerships have watched new Jeeps remain on their lots much longer than they once did. A major part of the challenge comes from the direction Jeep has taken with its pricing and positioning. The company has gradually pushed several models further upmarket, attempting to give them a more premium character. Predictably, prices followed that strategy upward. In the United States, even a relatively straightforward Wrangler can move beyond the $45,000 mark, while heavily equipped versions can quickly climb towards $65,000 or more. Expensive vehicles are not automatically a problem. Buyers routinely spend more when the product makes them feel that the additional money is buying better materials, stronger technology, greater refinement, or a noticeably better ownership experience. The difficulty for Jeep is that some customers are beginning to question whether the product has improved enough to justify how far prices have moved, and dealership inventory gives us an idea of just how serious the challenge has become. In July of this year, Jeep inventory in the United States at times represented roughly 160 days of supply. The broader industry was sitting closer to approximately 80 days. Toyota, by comparison, was around 37 days, while Honda was closer to 48. That difference matters. It means certain Jeep vehicles were taking considerably longer to leave dealer lots than models from some of the brand's biggest competitors. When inventory keeps accumulating, manufacturers and dealers can eventually face increasing pressure to introduce incentives, adjust production, or rethink pricing, but slow-moving inventory was only one part of the story. Another major issue soon placed even more attention on the brand. In June of 2026, Stellantis announced a large recall involving the Jeep Wrangler and Gladiator. More than 1 million vehicles were affected in the United States alone, while the worldwide figure climbed beyond 1,300,000 units. The concern centered on an electrical connection associated with the power steering system. Under certain circumstances, excessive heat could develop around that connection, potentially damaging nearby components and creating the possibility of a serious thermal event. What made the situation especially uncomfortable for owners was that the concern was not limited to vehicles being driven. According to road safety authorities, an affected Jeep could potentially experience an issue even while parked. In other words, the engine did not necessarily have to be running and the vehicle did not have to be moving for the concern to exist. Stellantis acknowledged multiple incidents associated with the defect, along with at least one reported injury. As an added precaution, some owners were advised to leave their vehicles parked outdoors and away from buildings or other vehicles until the necessary repair could be completed. Now put yourself in the owner's position. You buy a vehicle from a brand that has spent decades building its reputation around toughness and durability. Then you receive guidance suggesting that, until a repair is performed, you should be careful about where you park it. For a company whose entire identity is connected to confidence in demanding conditions, that kind of situation can create an image problem far larger than the repair itself, and these concerns did not suddenly begin with one recall. Over the years, some Jeep owners have reported water leaks, transmission-related issues, and electronic problems that can be frustrating to diagnose. Vehicles such as the Grand Cherokee and Compass have also received criticism from some owners for infotainment and software systems that can respond slowly, freeze, or behave inconsistently. That creates an uncomfortable contradiction for Jeep. This is a brand whose reputation was originally built around machines intended to operate in extremely challenging environments. Simplicity, genuine off-road capability, and rugged construction helped turn the Jeep name into one of the most recognizable automotive identities in the world, but the question some shoppers are asking today is very different. If Jeep prices continue moving closer to traditional premium territory, should buyers not also expect the refinement, electronics, build quality, and overall dependability to advance at the same pace? Reliability studies and owner satisfaction surveys have added to that pressure in recent years. That makes it increasingly difficult to dismiss every complaint as nothing more than a handful of frustrated comments online. For at least part of Jeep's customer base, confidence in the brand appears to have weakened, and that may reveal one of the biggest risks behind Jeep's recent strategy. By trying to become more expensive, sophisticated, and exclusive, the company may have moved away from some of the qualities that attracted enthusiasts in the first place. Many longtime Jeep fans were never asking for a luxury SUV simply because it carried the 7-slot grille. They wanted something capable, durable, relatively attainable, and unmistakably connected to the rugged character that made Jeep famous. Now the consequences of that transformation are becoming increasingly visible, both in how customers perceive the brand and in how its vehicles are performing in the marketplace, and the next 3 cases raise even bigger questions. If this breakdown is helping you understand what is happening behind the scenes in today's automotive industry, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That small gesture helps us continue researching, checking, and explaining these stories in a way that makes the rapidly changing car market easier to understand. At number 3, we have a Japanese automaker whose current direction has left many longtime enthusiasts wondering what happened to the company they once knew, Mitsubishi. There was a time when this badge immediately brought to mind bold engineering, motorsport, and a willingness to experiment with technology. Cars such as the Lancer Evolution became genuine icons, proving on rally stages around the world just how far Mitsubishi could push performance and innovation. Today, that era feels increasingly distant. Across several major markets, the brand has lost considerable ground. Sales have weakened, some dealers have gradually dropped the Mitsubishi franchise, and the company has reduced its presence in regions where it once played a much larger role. Its complete withdrawal from China was especially symbolic, considering how important that market has become to the global automotive industry. The financial picture has also become much more difficult. During the first 9 months of one fiscal year, Mitsubishi reported a net loss equivalent to roughly $30 million. Just 1 year earlier, the company had still recorded a profit of more than 33 billion yen. Operating performance deteriorated sharply as well. Operating profit fell by nearly 70%, while global sales declined by approximately 6% over the same period. In total, Mitsubishi sold just under 590,000 vehicles, but perhaps even more revealing is how quickly the company has been forced to revise its own expectations. In some forecasts, Mitsubishi cut its projected profit by more than 3/4 within a relatively short period. That suggests the challenge is not simply a slow-moving structural problem that might take years to unfold. Even in the near term, predicting the company's performance has become considerably more difficult. The weakening of Mitsubishi's position is especially visible in the United States. Since 2019, the brand has lost 56 dealerships there. That represents roughly 16% of its distribution network and stands out as one of the more significant dealer network contractions among automakers operating in the American market. For the dealers that remain, the business case can also be difficult. Average gross margins on the sale of a new Mitsubishi can sometimes fall below 2%. When the return becomes that thin, dealers naturally begin asking whether it still makes sense to dedicate showroom space, employees, and valuable inventory capacity to the brand. Point 1 detail shows just how weak demand can become. Even years after production of the Mirage came to an end, some American dealers were still holding brand new, never registered examples. Think about what that means. Vehicles from a model that was no longer even being built were still sitting on dealer lots waiting for their first owners, and this is not only a problem involving discontinued cars. The models Mitsubishi currently depends on for most of its volume have also faced pressure. The Outlander, Outlander Sport, and Eclipse Cross have all posted notable declines during certain comparable sales periods. That is particularly important because these SUVs now make up a major portion of Mitsubishi's lineup. For many longtime fans, however, one decision still represents something deeper than declining sales figures: bringing back the Eclipse name for a crossover. The original Mitsubishi Eclipse was a sporty coupe that became a defining car for an entire generation, especially through the 1990s and the early 2000s. Years later, Mitsubishi introduced the Eclipse Cross, an SUV that shared almost none of the original car's character, proportions, or performance-focused identity. For enthusiasts, that decision came to represent something larger. It felt as though Mitsubishi was borrowing one of the strongest names from its past while moving further away from the qualities that had made that name meaningful in the first place. After the end of the Lancer evolution and the disappearance of smaller models such as the Mirage, Mitsubishi's lineup in many countries is now dominated by SUVs and crossovers. And even within that smaller range, not every vehicle is developed entirely by Mitsubishi itself. In Europe, the Mitsubishi ASX is one of the clearest examples. The current generation is heavily based on the Renault Captur through cooperation between the two manufacturers. From a business standpoint, the strategy makes sense because sharing an existing platform can dramatically reduce development costs. But it also shows how heavily Mitsubishi now depends on partners to keep its product range fresh. That was one of the core purposes of the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance in the first place: share platforms, engines, technology, and development expenses so that each company could bring new vehicles to market more efficiently. For Mitsubishi, however, that same strategy is beginning to create a different kind of question. When much of the underlying engineering comes from larger partners, and more components are shared across the alliance, some observers naturally begin wondering what technical identity still belongs uniquely to Mitsubishi, and that is where the contrast with the company's past becomes impossible to ignore. There was a period when Mitsubishi was willing to challenge Toyota, Subaru, and other major manufacturers on some of the toughest rally stages in the world. It launched distinctive cars, experimented with unusual engineering, and sometimes introduced ideas that appeared remarkably advanced for their era. Today, Mitsubishi operates far more cautiously in many markets. Instead of trying to set trends or surprise the industry, the company is increasingly focused on controlling costs, relying on partnerships, and maintaining competitiveness with a smaller and more concentrated lineup. That change is enormous. The brand that once inspired enthusiasts with the Lancer Evolution, the Eclipse, and a long history of motorsport success has become a manufacturer whose immediate priority is simply to protect its position in an automotive industry that keeps becoming more competitive, and that is exactly why Mitsubishi belongs in this ranking. Its problem is certainly not a lack of history. In fact, very few Japanese manufacturers can claim such a colorful and technically ambitious past. The real question now is whether Mitsubishi can take that heritage and turn it into a new identity strong enough to give the brand a clear path forward. At number 2, we come to a luxury brand facing a challenge that is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore: reliability. Lincoln, Ford's premium division, has completely reinvented its image over the past several years. The problem is that this transformation has not convinced every buyer that the ownership experience has improved at the same pace. When someone spends more than $75,000 on a large luxury SUV, they are buying much more than soft leather, an attractive cabin, or the prestige of a premium badge. At that price, they expect the vehicle to work properly without constantly wondering which system might become the next source of frustration. And that is exactly where Lincoln has started receiving more criticism. Several vehicles across the lineup have been involved in recalls, electronic glitches, and other technical issues. Some owners have reported displays that suddenly stop responding, driver assistance features that do not always behave as expected, and repeated warranty visits they never imagined would become part of the experience after purchasing such an expensive vehicle. The Lincoln Aviator is one of the clearest examples. It is among the most sophisticated SUVs Lincoln sells, packed with technology and premium equipment. But greater complexity also creates more opportunities for things to go wrong, and owners have reported concerns involving both the transmission and various electronic systems. Its surround view camera system shows just how disruptive even one electronic issue can become. On certain vehicles, the camera image may temporarily disappear and be replaced by a blue screen. That becomes especially inconvenient while backing up, because the feature designed to improve visibility and make maneuvering easier can suddenly become unavailable at exactly the moment the driver wants to use it. The Nautilus has faced its own share of attention as well. The model has been included in multiple recall campaigns, including concerns involving electrical components that could behave abnormally under certain circumstances. Then there is the enormous digital interface dominating the Nautilus cabin. In an older vehicle, losing an infotainment screen might mean temporarily losing music or navigation. In a modern luxury SUV, the situation can be much more disruptive because important vehicle information and controls may now depend on those displays. If a major screen becomes unavailable while driving, the problem can affect far more than entertainment. Another decision has also surprised some longtime Lincoln customers. The current Nautilus is built in China. That does not automatically mean the vehicle is lower quality. Modern Chinese factories are capable of producing highly sophisticated vehicles. But for a company that spent decades connecting its identity to American luxury and the heritage of the United States auto industry, moving production of such an important model overseas represents a significant shift in perception for some buyers. Lincoln also found itself involved in a much larger Ford recall during 2026. More than 740,000 pickups and SUVs were affected, including the Lincoln Aviator and Navigator, along with Ford models such as the Explorer, Expedition, and F-150. This time, the concern involved part of the transmission and the mechanism responsible for keeping the vehicle securely in place when parked. Under certain conditions, a component could potentially fail to perform as intended, creating the possibility that the vehicle might not remain as firmly secured as expected. Think about that from the owner's perspective. You park a premium SUV, get out, and naturally assume it will remain exactly where you left it. A system responsible for something that basic should be something you never have to think about. If there is even a possibility that it may not behave correctly under certain conditions, confidence can disappear very quickly. That is particularly damaging for a luxury brand. Buyers are not paying a premium only for impressive screens, powerful engines, and high-end materials. They are also paying for peace of mind. Basic functions are supposed to feel completely dependable, and the Aviator and Nautilus are not the only models that have drawn complaints. With the smaller Lincoln Corsair, some owners have mentioned unusual vibrations and occasional issues with features such as remote start. Individually, these problems may not sound dramatic. But in the premium segment, small frustrations matter because they often determine whether an owner returns to the same brand when it is time to buy another vehicle, and there is one rival that has been especially effective at attracting exactly the kind of customer Lincoln wants to keep: Lexus. While Lincoln continues working through questions surrounding electronics and quality consistency, Lexus has built an extremely strong reputation for long-term durability. That difference becomes even more important once these vehicles enter the used car market. A pre-owned Lincoln can sometimes depreciate more quickly than a comparable Lexus. The reason is straightforward. Used car buyers are not only comparing equipment lists and purchase prices. They are also thinking about what the vehicle may cost to maintain and repair several years down the road. That creates a difficult cycle for Lincoln. Once buyers begin questioning the dependability of a model, demand on the used market can weaken. Lower demand can put pressure on resale values. And when depreciation becomes more noticeable, some new car buyers begin hesitating because they already know they may lose a significant portion of the vehicle's value during ownership. What makes the situation especially frustrating is that Lincoln clearly knows how to build a convincing luxury environment. Some of its interiors are genuinely impressive. Passenger space is generous, comfort features are abundant, and the massive displays can make the cabin feel extremely modern. But all of that quickly becomes secondary if the systems underneath the experience do not consistently feel dependable. In the premium segment, a long equipment list is not enough. A luxury vehicle still needs to feel well built years after leaving the showroom, and more importantly, it needs to handle everyday transportation with as few unnecessary complications as possible. Lincoln has therefore reached an important stage in its evolution. Ford now has to prove that its luxury division can improve quality consistently, reduce recurring technical frustrations, and rebuild stronger confidence among buyers, because if the gap continues to widen between Lincoln and established premium competitors such as Lexus, the brand could find itself in a far more difficult position over the next few years than many drivers currently expect. And now we reach number 1, by far the most complicated case on this entire list. This is not some tiny automaker that could quietly disappear without most drivers noticing. We are talking about one of the largest automotive groups in the world, Stellantis. Under the Stellantis umbrella sit some of the most recognizable names in the industry, including Jeep, Chrysler, Ram, Peugeot, Fiat, and Maserati. Until now, the sheer size of the group has helped absorb some of the difficulties affecting individual brands. But that same size can also create an enormous challenge. When a company controls so many different marques and several of them start struggling at the same time, managing the entire portfolio becomes far more difficult. Some of these brands would likely be in an even more vulnerable position if they had to survive completely on their own. Chrysler and Maserati, in particular, have spent years dealing with weak sales, limited product ranges, and growing questions about where each brand is actually heading. But one of the most damaging technical stories connected to the group began with an engine that was originally supposed to represent efficiency and clever engineering. The PureTech turbocharged 3-cylinder. One of its most unusual features was a timing belt designed to operate directly inside the engine oil. On paper, the idea had clear advantages. It was intended to reduce friction, lower mechanical noise, and improve overall efficiency. But on certain versions, that same solution eventually became a major source of trouble. Over time, the belt could begin deteriorating in some engines. Small pieces of material could then circulate through the lubrication system and interfere with critical components. For affected owners, the result could mean expensive repairs, uncertainty about long-term durability, and something even harder for an automaker to recover once it begins to disappear: trust. The scale of the issue led to customer complaints across several European countries, legal action, and different measures designed to address affected vehicles and owners. At the same time, Stellantis began reshaping parts of its industrial operation. Historic production locations were also affected by that transformation, including the French plant in Douvrin, where decades of automotive manufacturing activity came to an end. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Chrysler is facing a very different problem: finding a meaningful place in the market again. This once prominent American brand has lost an enormous amount of ground over the years. Its lineup became so narrow that, for a period, the Pacifica was essentially carrying most of the brand by itself. The contrast with the Chrysler of previous decades is striking. This was once a company selling sedans, family vehicles, and large models to a broad range of American buyers. Today, Chrysler can sometimes feel like a brand that remains alive largely because it still has access to the resources and protection of a much larger corporate group. Maserati was also supposed to benefit from Stellantis' scale. The plan for the famous Italian Trident was straightforward: modernize the brand, improve profitability, and expand its global influence. So far, however, the results have not always matched those ambitions. Worldwide sales have come under significant pressure, while even the long-term direction of Maserati has generated questions inside the organization. The grayscale helps explain why some buyers have become more cautious. This SUV had an important mission. It was supposed to attract new customers by combining modern technology, strong performance, and traditional Italian luxury in a more accessible format, but some owners have reported electronic problems ranging from infotainment glitches to backup cameras becoming unavailable, inaccurate electronic parking brake warnings, and climate control systems that do not always operate consistently. There have also been reports from a limited number of owners describing sudden power loss or unexpected engine shutdowns while driving. Even when cases remain isolated, complaints like these matter greatly in the premium segment because customer expectations rise dramatically with the price of the vehicle. And then there is Jeep.as we already covered earlier in this video. Another major Stellantis brand is dealing with high prices, softer demand, large inventories at some dealerships, and major recall campaigns. That is exactly what makes Stellantis different from the other cases on this list. The pressure is not concentrated in just one division. Several brands are dealing with very different challenges at the same time. The situation becomes even more complicated when you add instability at the top of the organization. At a moment when electric vehicles, Chinese automakers, and software-driven technology are transforming the industry, Stellantis needs an especially clear and consistent strategy. The group controls a total of 14 brands. From a business perspective, the logic is easy to understand. Shared platforms, engines, technologies, development costs, purchasing power, and global distribution can create enormous efficiencies, but managing that much diversity can also become extremely complicated. 14 brands mean 14 histories, different customers, and different identities that have to remain distinct enough to justify their existence. When multiple